Well, today's video is going to be one of those chilled, ranty videos. It's not going to be very edited, and it's me just going to be talking about my thoughts and feelings about a certain topic. It's going to be more of the negative side of the genre that I talk about on YouTube, for example, historical indie games, and why a majority of them have actually seemed to fail in the past couple of years. Of course, this is not 100% fact and true that they've all failed, but I'm going to be talking about why the ones that have tend to not do so well and what people need to watch out for in the future. So make sure you grab a cup of tea or a piece of food and just relax and enjoy today's video on why historical indie games fail. Now, the games I'm going to be talking about today are, so to speak, Life of Rome, Valnir Rok, Of Kings and Men, and World of Castles. And furthermore, these are in a separate category with Valhalla, Holdfast Nations at War, Whigs and Tories, and War of Rights. The reason they're a separate category will come very clear very soon, but these are basically games that I don't think will fail for different reasons, but are doing it the right way when the first games, I think, are doing it the wrong way. So let's get straight into it. First off, what do I mean by historical indie game? Well, this is an indie game where indie, it sort of means independently published, so it doesn't have a proper publisher and they're doing it on their own, but the way I'm talking about it and the way most people look at it is just a smaller scale game with a smaller scale studio and so on. And a lot of these are proper indie games, but some of them do have other publishers as well, such as War of Rights and so on. And when I say historical, I don't mean historically accurate. I mean games based in history. May it be the events, the characters, or just the armor and weapons are somewhat similar to stuff of the past. It doesn't have to be exactly to a period, but something that is based in somewhat history in the future. So let's start off with Life of Rome. Now, many of you might not know what Life is Rome is, because I did one video on it a long time ago, I think, and that was when it was cancelled. Yeah, this game was so ambitious that they just decided to cancel it. It was a game that was trying to be a third-person Roman RPG. Just imagine Persistent World for Mount & Blade, but in Rome, and it's a full game, but it's a massive game, so you could go around, you could recruit into the army, or you could become a merchant, and so on. And you could do all these things in living in the Life of Rome, as you might expect. But this game, unfortunately, I think it was about a year and a half ago now, was cancelled by the developers after being backed by a lot of money, and it was cancelled. Now, this game was something that so many people were excited for. I mean, it's Rome. Anyone knows me knows that I love Rome. I love the whole time period, specifically more Imperial Rome when the emperors start coming in. I think this is just so awesome. The tithe of power where it's fighting between the Senate and the emperors, and how sometimes they come together and sometimes they can be extremely successful or there can be disasters throughout. The army and just how they fight throughout is absolutely awesome, and I love that time period. And Life of Rome seemed to encapsulate that. It seemed to be, you could go to the Colosseum, you could walk through the streets of Rome, you could buy things from places, and it looked absolutely awesome. And yet it was cancelled after being backed and have so much support behind it. Next one is Valnir Rok. Now, this is a game that actually came out in early access, and I know early access has had a lot of stick in the past for being something where games will just come out as a cash grab and things, and people won't get money. And there's a reason for it, because games like this come out. Valnir Rok had so much potential. It was a survival game. Yeah, I know we've had a lot of open world survival games in the past, but this one focused a lot more on the survival in the time of the Vikings. You played as a Dane, and of course you can go around, you can craft things, you can get armor, you can get weapons, you could hunt, you could mine, you can chop down trees and meet other players. There are also missions you could do within it, and there was sort of a very faint storyline that you could do, and I actually did 2 videos on it trying to start a series, but I couldn't continue it because it was just so buggy. It was such a mess of a game, and it's still on Steam, it's still going, the developers are still developing, but me going into it, trying to play it, there's no one on any of the servers. I try and get into it, but it's just so buggy. It's very hard to actually get anything done. It doesn't feel right. Every game has a sort of feel to it, and sometimes it feels really nice. And I think this is what did Mount & Blade so well. It just felt good as a game. And this is why games such as the Napoleonic Wars DLC are still more successful than Holdfast Nations at War at the moment, even though that was supposed to be the new standalone NW. But it's because Mount & Blade just felt a lot better than Holdfast did, which is why people are still playing that more. And Valnir Rok just didn't feel right. I don't know if any of you guys have actually played it, but if you have, make sure you leave your comments down below on what you think of this game, because there's just something about it that wasn't great. It was a buggy mess. The graphics weren't great, the mechanics were really not working very well, and it was just very glitchy in total. It was a typical early access open world survival syndrome that you get with many things these days. Maybe it's going to be fixed in the future, but at the moment it's just not great. The next one is of Kings and Men, which is notorious. My god, anyone on this channel probably knows what this game was. It was made by the guys that made the CRPG mod for Mount and Blade, and they wanted a sort of battlegrounds-esque feel to Mount and Blade, where you'd go into the battles and you'd be able to level up your character, a bit like CRPG. You'd be able to get new weapons and all that stuff, and you level up your character as killing people. There were different game modes like skirmishes and capture the flag, and it was great. It had a lot of hype around it, but this is very famous for being a failed game, because yes, it has failed, and I don't care how many people message me on Steam saying, oh, there's a new update, or some people, it's failed, it's gone, the game has gone. Stop trying to invite me to your Kings and Men servers, please, just please. It's a terrible game, and I'm sorry, it just is, and that's why it hasn't stayed. But this was very notorious because when it was first announced, it was announced as an open world RPG, where you could command AI in your own little cities. You'd be able to build up your forts, your castles, you'd be able to take out your troops, train them up, and you'd be able to go into battle in a massive multiplayer world, where you could have hundreds of men in the field fighting each other, with clans fighting clans, in a sort of persistent world type standalone game. I'm not going to explain what persistent world is, go and search it up somewhere. And you'd have all the boring jobs like cutting down trees and mining and stuff done by AI. You could order them around. That was shown in the trailer, but that never came out in the game, so it ended up being this battlegrounds type game where you just upgrade your character. And hated by the community, this game was absolutely despised. People were optimistic at first, including me, but my god, did this get a lot of backlash. The amount of support this got at the beginning, and then when people realised that they'd just been completely lied to, it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous, and that game failed and died a sad death. It could have been so much, but it just never ended up being. Next is World of Castles, which is a bit strange for me to put on the failed games list because it's not technically released yet, but I have played it, and it is unplayable, completely unplayable. And I would have thought that if they're handing out copies to you know, YouTubers and things like that to test, that it would be playable in some way, but it's completely unplayable. There's literally no gameplay to it. This was a game where you would build castles and you'd be able to attack other people's castles with troops and things like that. Now this is one that's got a bit of hope because it's not completely been released yet, and maybe they could do something with it, but as far as I know, it's one developer that's just trying to take on this massive thing. And this is where it comes into common with all these games. What went wrong with all of them? And it's just one word: ambition. Complete ambition. And ambition is absolutely great, don't get me wrong. Going for something that you don't think you could probably hit, but you're going to try it anyway, is absolutely amazing, unless you're leading other people on and other people are relying you, assuming that you can hit this when you're not even sure you can. Life of Rome went for the ambitious thing of getting a whole simulation and RPG in Rome, didn't hit it. Valnir Rok had a bit less ambition because it's a bit easier to make a survival game. It had this open world survival game, but the team behind it obviously just didn't have the means to create it in an unbuggy, actually playable way. Of Kings and Men, I think it's safe to say, went for the ambitious persistent world standalone game and showed that off to everyone, and everyone was so excited, but they just couldn't pull it off. And World of Castles is the same. They don't have the resources to do this. And this is why I think ambition is the worst thing for indie developers, because it seems to kill games off so much. And there's a reason why they do it, because it gets people support, it gets people into the game, and it gets them to give them money so they're able to do it. That's not a bad thing. I just have a problem when there's so much ambition and it gets so many people in and excited, and then it turns out to be nothing like what it was first said, and there's no capabilities of actually doing this. Now, why is Valhalla, Holdfast, Wigs and Toys and War of Rights in a different list? And this is because it's not too ambitious, but they're still in this video, and I'll explain why. Now these games, Valhalla, it's a Viking battle royale game. This is not too tricky to do, as long as you can get the netcode right, the multiplayer working fine. It's not too tricky to do. This game has been very much funded. I think it's like 106% funded at the moment on Indiegogo. So if this doesn't come out the way it's said to be, this is just going to go on back onto that other list, because it has got its full funding and even more. And if they can't deliver on what they promised with this full funding, there's going to be more issues with the game, and it's just going to join this other list as well. Holdfast, Nations at War. That has potential. Now, Holdfast, Wigs and Toys and War of Rights, everyone knows these are inspired by Mount and Blade DLCs or mods. Holdfast by the Napoleon Wars DLC, Wigs and Toys by the Wigs and Toys mods, and War of Rights by the North and South mod. Now, the reason these guys are actually getting somewhere. Why it's actually working is because it's not too ambitious. Yeah, Holdfast has pretty bad melee. Holdfast has focused a bit too much on the naval combat when, to be fair, NW players just don't really care about naval combat. Most of us just want really satisfying line battles and things, and that's why Holdfast, I think, hasn't done as well as it did upon release. Of course, everyone rushed into it from Napoleonic Wars because we all wanted to see a Napoleonic Wars standalone game, but it wasn't quite as satisfying as Napoleonic Wars. Yes, that can change, they can update, they can still do something with it, but unfortunately, it's not done quite as well in the longevity as a lot of people hope for it. But it was still successful, because it had this player base that had built up from the Napoleonic Wars DLC for Mount and Blade. It built up this, and everyone rushed into it, and they delivered on what they promised, because they weren't too ambitious. It was more of just a standalone for Mount and Blade Napoleonic Wars DLC. Now, even though they did deliver on what they promised, it may not have been a massive game, and it may have had a player base that has dropped off in the last few months because it's not had as much content as people actually want to stick around. But they didn't lie. They kept on what they promised and they delivered on it. And that's why this game, I don't think, has been a failure. I think it's been pretty successful, and from some inside sources, Jesus Christ, they made a lot of money from the initial release of this game. And good on them. And I'm happy that Holdfast has actually done this. Yeah, they need to fix a few things if they want to keep the player base back up and they want to keep it going. But all in all, I think they did pretty well because they weren't too ambitious. Wigs and Toys is a game that the alpha has just come out, and I'll be doing a full video on this very soon. It's a similar thing. They're going for the same thing as Holdfast, where they're taking the Wigs and Toys mod and they're just expanding upon it. They're taking the line battle mechanics of Mount and Blade, they're putting things like hunting in it, but not too much that actually takes away. They're putting bigger maps in it. They're putting a bit more complex like reload animations and things like that, and they're putting some new mechanics where if you get shot at and it just whizzes past your head, you flinch to the side. Little touches like that, not completely changing the game to something people don't recognize, but it's still adding to it, which I think is absolutely great. And Wigs and Tories, I've spoken to the developer, I know him quite well, Marks, and I've said to my concerns, this could go down a bit like Holdfast, where the player base could drop off. Yeah, they might have a big player base to start with because of the initial fan base, but it could drop off after a bit. But he knows the risks and he knows what he's doing, so I'm confident that this game is going to be kept up, and hopefully they're going to go down the right route. They've not promised anything, which is great. They're just releasing it and adding in everything that they say they're going to add in. They're not doing anything too ambitious. And lastly, War of Rights. Now, War of Rights is on the CryEngine. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It plays fairly well. It's pretty decently optimized, to be fair. It's still just War of Rights. It's still just a line battle game, and it's got a great player base. It's got a very dedicated player base. Now, it's still in closed beta or alpha or some early access version that you can only play if you backed it, and I think it's great. I think it's got a really good player base behind it, and once again, it's not too ambitious. But the reason these indie games have failed, like Life of Rome, Valnir Rok, of Kings of Men and World of Castles, because they don't have the funding for it. And when they do, sometimes they don't know how to use it. They don't necessarily have enough manpower to create these ambitious worlds or games that they first thought they could. And they sometimes don't have the player base or fans to keep it going. Valnir Rok is one of a great example for this. It just doesn't have the player base or fans to keep the devs really working on it as much as I think they need to get this game to a good point. And of course, it's a never-ending cycle, because if they don't have the fans or player base, the devs aren't going to feel motivated to keep working on it. But it's not going to get the fans or player base if the devs don't keep working on it. So it's a whole never-ending cycle for games like this, and it's a shame, to be fair. I think there's a reason for a lot of the lower player base and why these games die, and it's because not just historical indie games, but indie games or early access games have had such a lack of trust by fans. Because unfortunately, at the end of the day, games like of Kings of Men, they took the money and they didn't exactly say what they were actually going to do with it, and a lot of people have said that they've just run off with it. You can't get a refund for it, and a lot of people were annoyed by that, and I can see why people get annoyed by that. But at the same time, I feel like they just didn't know what to do with the money, and they promised too much, and I think that was pretty clear. But this still proves a lack of trust with the fans if games keep doing this, keep failing. Life of Rome, getting all the support, getting all the money and funding it needed, and then people just left. And then the fans were like, wait, what are we supposed to do now? You've taken our money and you've run off? Okay, well, that's fair enough. So why would they support the next big game if their last money that they've just donated has just been chucked to the side and they don't know where it's actually gone and the developers have actually run away from the game? Now, I don't have much knowledge in game development. That's pretty clear, and I don't claim to know much about it. But I know how games work and how they sell, and I especially know the player base and community around these historical indie games. Now, I don't believe any of these games that I've listed have been cash grabs. I think that's a complete false accusation, that these have always been passion projects by the developers, and even if they failed, it's not because they were expecting to do that in the first place, they just wanted the money to run off. It's because they thought they could do a lot more than they actually could. Now, it's always great to be ambitious, as I said before, but just as a bit of advice, if anyone's making or planning to make any of these historical indie games, or just a game in general, don't promise more than you know 100% you can deliver, because once you've done that, it's gone. Absolutely gone. Think of it this way. You're betting off £100, and that £100 is a prize for someone, I don't know, winning a competition. As soon as you say this £100 is your prize for winning a competition, you don't own that money anymore. Now, that's the same with promising for a game. As soon as you promise a feature or something in a game, there's no way you can go back on that. As long as you promise that, it has to be there. Otherwise, you're going to get this backlash. And even if you don't, you make sure it is compensated by something. And I know this is a bit of a long video, but I thought it was quite an interesting one. And if you're still here at the end of the video, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to know your thoughts on these historical indie games and why you think most of them have failed, because honestly, all of them have been ones I've been excited for. There's not been a single game here that I've just thought, oh, I don't really care about that. All of these games I've really wanted to play. And saying that, and out of them all, I would say none of them are games that I'd actually have played yet properly. Life of Rome doesn't exist. Valnir Rok is just not a good game. Of Kings and Men doesn't exist anymore, and when it did exist, I did not enjoy it at all. World of Castles, no, just not playable. Valhalla doesn't exist yet. Holdfast Nations at War, I played for the first couple of weeks, and then I've not touched it since, because there's not really anything to go back on. Whigs and Tories has literally came out the other day. I'm hoping to get more into that, but I'm worried it's going to have the same fate. I'm hoping that they know what they're doing, and I'm going to trust them for now, but I guess we'll see. And War of Rights is the same. I played it for a bit, but I've not come back to it because there's just not enough content in it yet. So don't be too ambitious, but make sure you're still giving the players enough stuff to keep them going. Because all the games that have actually succeeded here and come out still haven't had enough content to keep players there. And that's what I'm hoping to see in the future. But thank you guys for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this long ranty video. If you did, make sure you leave a like on it and leave your comments and thoughts down below. And make sure you hit that subscribe button with your notifications on so you get all the details as soon as a video comes out. Now, if you want to hear more about me or my life, just make sure you go and follow my Twitter. I also post all my videos, links on Twitter as soon as they come out. There'll be a link in the description as always. But until then, guys, I will see you in the next one.